Hello and welcome to week 31 of the FUT Weekly podcast, and this is a gameplay episode. We normally do a big one about how you can get the most out of champs, basically, because that is what a lot of people are focusing on at this point, and they become very rewarding, those champs rewards, and we'll talk about that too. But let me introduce our guests. As you'd expect, we have FUT Legend AirJapes. Welcome back.
Thank you much, Ben. Happy to be back and happy to be getting beefier rewards.
Yeah, indeed. And we have with us content expert JoshXLS. Hello, welcome back.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been nice. I missed the gameplay pod for last week, so nice to get back on board for this one just in time for champs this weekend.
Yeah, we should say we're recording this at a slightly different time, which means we won't be talking much about current content, more about specifics of gameplay and champs. So we can introduce our final guest, who I think is going to be very helpful because a lot of champs is about mentality, and we know from past podcasts he has a lot of advice on that particular subject. It is Jeppe. Welcome back, Jeppe. Good to have you on.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be back on.
It's great to have you. And we're going to start actually by talking about champs rewards. We're recording this actually a bit earlier than we would typically, so we won't have finished and got our rewards, but many of you listeners will have, I'm sure, so you'll be aware of how they're working for Team of the Season, much improved, and with those TOTS red picks in there. And the thing that I think has caused the most controversy is the difference between 11 wins and 14 wins, because for 11 wins, you get to one of 3 Team of the Season red picks. And then for 14, you get one of 4 Team of the Season red picks, and also an untradeable pack, which contains 3 Team of the Season players untradeable. So obviously a lot stronger. Now, this is definitely a big jump between 11 and 14 wins. But it is also, Josh, the biggest gap in terms of number of wins between tiers in champs, actually. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, is it fair? Probably, because I feel like a lot of people feel like they can get 11 wins comfortably and 14 wins is a push. I feel like 9 and 11 is where the majority of players sit. I mean, that seems logical, right? It's half the wins. But that 14 then is that extra bit rewarding. I don't know that it's fair to go from 3 tradable Team of the Seasons to 0, as well as dropping the red picks. But I think the thing that I would be more annoyed at, and obviously it's not about me, but the thing I'd be more annoyed at is if I was getting 18, 19 wins, I don't know that you're being rewarded enough over even 14 wins. So, if you get 14 wins, it's 2 1 of 4 picks and a 3 Team of the Season player pack. If you get 18 wins, you only get 2 picks. Yeah, they're 1 of 5, but it's still only 2 picks and the same Team of the Season player pack. So you don't even really get that much more. I think that's I think where people are a little bit miffed with these rewards is if you're that good at the game, you should probably be rewarded for it, right?
Yeah, although if you're that good at the game, get 19 wins and then you get a whole extra pick, right? but you're right, the difference between 14 and 18 seems huge. Jeppe, let's come to you. What are your thoughts on these rewards changes for TOTS?
Well, I guess I agree that you don't really get rewarded enough for getting the rank 1, rank 2, etc. And for me, the 14 wins jumps out pretty clear. It seems like it's worth it to get the 14 wins, but from there, the extra effort you would have to put in and the skill gap difference, it takes a lot to go from 14 wins to 19 wins, for example. So I guess you don't really get rewarded enough for being really good at the game.
Yeah, I think that does make sense. And I guess, Josh, you're a good person to ask because you were happy to quit out of 7 games and then play your games from that point in order to get a really comfortable 11-win finish. Is that something you won't now be doing?
Yeah, definitely. That'll be dropped for Team of the Season. I also find 14 wins is a much more comfortable achievement during Team of the Season. I know a lot of people say that everyone gets super sweaty, but I also feel like you get a lot of players who play champs for the first time in a while that maybe have just been plodding along in rivals or maybe have dropped the game for a bit and then get back interested again. Everybody's got free access to qualifiers, so there's no need to try and get the points through rivals. So 14 wins. I mean, last year, or maybe even 2 years ago now, I did Road to Glory that I started on the Tuesday, and by the Saturday, I got 14 wins in champs. So it's not something that I find too difficult to do. during team of the season. So yeah, I won't be giving away all 7, but you never know. Like we'll see come Wednesday morning how I feel about it.
Yeah. So Jeppes, in terms of the sort of matchmaking logic, the gamification of this, I guess it does make sense that if they, during team of the season, make 14 wins more desirable, you get more people playing who are not necessarily going to be able to make 14 wins, but will play to try and get it. And for someone like Josh, that would make it easier because he's facing more players who are going to continue playing rather than just stopping at 11. So there's a bigger pool of players continuing to play. Is my logic there sound, or have I just made that up?
I mean, I guess you could talk me into that. Like, honestly, I'll tell you what I'm least looking forward to with this. People aren't going to quit.
That's true.
It's just going to be a lot more exhausting because people are going to be like trying so hard to get the 14 wins to your point. So I guess I do agree with that. But the like downside of it is going to be that they are like drastically going to try to do whatever they can for a comeback. And the matches are just going to take quite a bit longer. Because like the whole weekend league is going to take a bit longer because of that. And that I am not looking forward to because that is an extra strain, and it's just harder to keep up your momentum when you. It's not like harder to keep up your momentum that way. What I mean is like it just takes a bigger toll on your focus when you have to constantly see all of these games out, even when you're just absolutely battering someone. It's just a different animal entirely. So that is what I'm most not looking forward to.
Yeah, I think we could talk more about that. I just wanted to cover one thing with Jeppe. If we're talking about hitting specific win thresholds and how, I want to be hitting 14 wins for these rewards, do you think that psychologically there's a sort of danger there when people say, I'm going to get this many wins? Like, is that cliche about, taking each game as it comes something that would actually help people?
I think in some way you just need to think of it as just another FUT Champs. I believe, based on what I've seen previously, that it's team of the season. People start to get emotionally invested in it, and they really want to get these really good rewards. So they start to, emotionally invest a lot more, which often results in them losing control or getting easily frustrated. And then you also see that people start to just drag the games out. They don't really quit, and that's fair enough. We all want these good rewards, but that's just correlates to what Jeppe said before. It's just going to be a lot more difficult. You won't get as many easy rage quits to get the momentum going. So I believe what you need to do during team of the season is, tactically, you need to have your setups. So I've seen so many people when I play FUT Champs normally, when I get up by a couple of goals in the end of the game, they request a pause, and then the opponent doesn't have the constant press ready. So once they, from the point where they request the pause, then when they actually get the pause, it's too late. So that's one thing. Just want to mention that people need to have their tactics set up right, so they don't waste any pauses, and then they can actually get back into the games. But mentally, I believe people are going to be more focused in general. They might try to keep the lead a bit earlier, run the clock down a bit earlier than you're usually used to. They might time waste even. And I guess we would all just try to do our best to get the win. So it's just in general going to be more sweaty. And I believe if you decide to play champs here, be more emotionally invested in champs this week. You also got to prepare yourself for, just in general for the whole period to play a lot more sweaty games. It's going to require way more focus. So that's really something people need to have in mind when they load up the game.
Do you find you can sense that in an opponent, Jeppes? You can, can't you? When that opponent is really taking it almost too seriously. You can kind of tell when they maybe need to win that game to get the next rank.
I don't know if I can tell. Oh,
really? You think you can?
I think people just get like desperate at this time. Like I think it's gonna feel like everybody feels like they're trying to get the next rank, because they are in many ways. So people just start getting really, really desperate, and then they oftentimes get behind, and then they still won't quit. I think the key is like if you're the person that's like desperately needs the win, like stop making bad decisions.
It was interesting actually watching which you may have done too. I was watching the Bayern Arsenal game, And that was a classic example of, I think, two teams really that were playing like there was so much on the line that they'd never really played much football, right? Like they weren't really able to execute their game plans, partly because this is a classic stalemate situation when, the stakes are high and things. It happens all the time. But I do think you get that in champs quite a bit. And for me, at least, I notice it like when my opponent, and I'm not saying it's necessarily both teams, sometimes I'm in, a comfortable position, so I'm not too concerned, but my opponent really is playing in a way that I don't think they would normally be playing in because they feel that pressure. And I guess that's what you mean. Like there is that extra element of stress added that just makes people play in a way that isn't necessarily the best representation of how they can play, basically.
It's that like desperation, but it's also like I've talked about that quicksand idea before. When people are in a must-win game and they go a goal down, they just get so desperate. And they start, like you can tell when people start rushing it forward. That's the big indicator to me. Like often, if there is one that I'm looking for, it's like they attack so quickly and they end up stranding their attacker with nobody to work with. So just be calm and like recognize that like you're going to lose some games. Like that's okay. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's the games that are like the 50-50 games where you might win some, you might lose some. Those are the games where you have to be like ready to be calm for, but like you're going to get matched with somebody better than you at some point. So like, don't worry about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as we're talking about mentality, let's take a break and then we'll be back to talk about it a bit more. I want to throw some scenarios at Jeppe just after this break. Hello and welcome back after the break. Right, Jeppe, I've got a scenario for you, which I'm interested to know how you'd handle kind of from a mentality perspective or what you'd kind of coach someone to do in this situation. Let's say it is 1-1 in the game. It's an important match, let's say, you're going for maybe your 14 wins, something like that, and you've got this game left. Maybe you've got the next one, but, it's getting tight. 1-1 in the 80th minute, or maybe 75th, let's say. What would you recommend I, in that situation, do to, get the win? Do you recommend changing things particularly? Are you going to stick with your current plan? Like, what is the recommendation? Because I noticed that people do get kind of a little twitchy at that point if they see that they're drawing and kind of want to go for that win. Do you recommend that? Or is there some logic to how you approach that?
Well, that's a really interesting scenario. I would say in general, since you're drawing, it's most likely a pretty close game. So I'd say just in general, with limited time left, just take a deep breath, be calm about it. And since it's probably going to be a game where margins might decide the game, you need to use all your mental energy on the game, your next move, all the basic stuff. Because if you start to think about what do I need to change? I really need to win this game. Do I go to this formation if he scores? Do I need to change this and change that? Then all that energy you should have used to do your next move, you suddenly spend thinking about the future and what's the potential results going to be. And that's just going to lose you some focus. And my general philosophy is that if you use 2 or 3 seconds thinking about something else, then those 2-3 seconds, you've just wasted them, because now you're most likely 2 or 3 seconds behind in the game, and then you need to make up for that. So in general, close games, just make sure that you spend all your energy on what you can control. Don't think about it too much. Instead, you should wait for those natural breaks in the games, for example, a throw-in, a goal kick. That's where you can have a think about, should you change anything? But once the game's going, if we just assuming that it's not a pause, spend all your energy on the game itself and what you can do right now. So when you have the ball, you focus on attack. When you lose the ball, that's where you focus on defending. I see a tendency in general that, let's say the opponent is attacking and it's late in the game, I'm already going to think about what I'm going to do with the ball when I intercept it. And that's okay. If you're a good player, well, it makes sense to think steps ahead. But I do believe also a lot of players have the tendency to think too many steps ahead in terms of what they're capable of, which then limits them in the moment. So in general, focus on the moment. What can I do right now? When you get the ball, that's where you can start to use your energy. scan the pitch, all that stuff you need to do to get a good attack.
Real quick, you mentioned something about like waiting till a natural pause in the game. Something that I realize that I do that I don't actually think about is if I'm in a really tight game, when I get those natural pauses, I just take a massive deep breath, which sounds so silly in some ways, but I oftentimes will just maybe put the controller down and take a breath even. And I find that often resets me, and I play much smarter following that break than I did previously to the break happening.
It's so crucial, just in general. I guess a lot of the players, let's say below 11 wins, they stress a lot about the FUT Championship. Well, a lot of players, of the good quality players, we have seen in the past that they give away a lot of free wins because maybe it's not worth it on the reward side. That's a different discussion. But in general, the players who are not capable of hitting the 14 wins, maximum 11 wins in general, they seem to stress a lot. Once they go down, you can see them start rushing the possession, not really keeping the calmness, taking the pauses they need. Sometimes I go ahead with 3 goals. My opponent still plays the game. They don't rage quit, fair enough, but they don't make any changes. And I can see that because when I have a break or a pause, I check the formation of the opponent. And I can see nothing's happened. So if you are stressed about things and you're rushing in general, it's just not going to be an enjoyable experience. You're not going to get the results. And I guess in general for 𝗏𝘅, you need to spread your games out. You have so much time. So instead of just thinking, I can get the team of the season packs and picks quite quickly, well, instead you could just be a bit more patient. I know it can be hard because we all want those good rewards, and we're used to maybe the decent players can do a great weekend league result just on a Friday. But you can't really do that in FUT Champs unless you're a regular rank 1, rank 2 player, I assume. So just take that advantage you've got now of spreading the games out, especially since we know, and we have talked a lot about this, that it's going to be sweaty. So it's going to cost you more mental energy, and therefore you need to be prepared to spread your games out so that it doesn't really turn into an enjoyable experience.
Something you said there about an opponent not making a change, I think is really important. I think in tight games, people very often don't go and make a substitution in the 65th, 70th minute, but it can have a massive difference, especially when you've still got those 5 substitutions. You can really change the feel of a game and change the energy in your team, especially up front, especially if you're somebody who likes to use a bit of press, like a team press on the D-pad or whatever it is that you do. You will have options on the bench that can change things up. Having a fast player, having a tall player, having a strong player, there are things that you can do that change the dynamic of a game to, and something that Jeppe said that I think is massively important. Have a look at your opponent's formation. Where are they playing their players? And it will inform the decisions you make then in terms of, okay, they're getting the better of me. If you feel like it's formational rather than necessarily a skill level, and even if it is a skill level, where can you try and create an advantage? Is there a formation you can switch into? Can you go to a kind of 3-back that's a little bit more attacking to try and counter what they're doing? There's so many changes that people don't make because they're so locked into the game that they're playing. And especially when it gets to the 80th minute and they're going, my players are taking terrible touches. It's like, yeah, they've got like a quarter bar of stamina. That's going to happen. I think a lot of it is about keeping calm and staying logical in the decisions that you're making and not getting drawn into the sweat too much and the kind of the angst you can feel towards an opponent.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about that. Especially because I think there's a tendency when you're at 1-1 in a game or, a tie later on, that you think, oh, if I change anything, maybe I'll be open to some unexpected event, which means that my opponent scores. But actually, it's very rare that bringing on a substitute, certainly in the attacking areas, is going to have a negative impact on you defensively. And if you haven't made a change by, the 70th minute or something, I think you can kind of safely say you're probably doing something wrong at that point, like, to be blunt about it. You should almost always make a change unless your subs are so much worse than your main team, which I think is unlikely considering the quality of player that is around at the moment. And another thing you said actually that got me thinking is something I do sometimes do is at half-time look at the passing maps that you can see. I think it's in player performance, and if you kind of flick across, you can start to see what passes your opponent is using most frequently. And that can be quite helpful because you don't always recognize that when you're playing the game, but when you see the map and then you start playing again in the second half, you'll start to spot that they are making specific passes more frequently and are looking for specific players or routes through you that you can then, manually look to cut out a bit. So that can be quite helpful. Let's maybe move on to another scenario then. If you are, Jeppe, 2-0 up in, let's say, the 70th minute, how do things differ then from that perspective in terms of your advice mentally and in terms of game management? Are there any differences there to the 1-1?
I think the main difference here is that you're most likely going to focus on how you can defend this lead and just make sure that the opponent doesn't get back into the game. I personally, when I play and I have a 2-0 lead late game, what I do is that I want to make sure that the opponent doesn't get back into the game, which sounds obvious, but instead of focusing on I need to keep this 2-0 lead, then I focus on making sure that the opponent doesn't get the next goal. If he then does get the next goal, that's a different story and that's a different situation. But in general, instead of trying to focus the 2-0 lead, I kind of see it as I have a 1-goal lead that I need to take advantage of, and I need to protect that lead. So I believe some of the players that plays this game for fun, they might not want a time waste, which is a good thing, I guess. But one thing you also need to have in mind is during those 70 minutes, you earned that lead. And most likely, if your opponent had the lead 2-0 in the 70th minute, for example, they probably would have done what they could to keep the lead. So now you earned that lead. I've played 70 presumably good minutes to get in front with 2 goals. So why would I throw that away? And this is where I start to just slow it down a bit, see what does the opponent bring into the match. Do they change anything? Do they start to press? And if I then feel like maybe this is a bit too defensive in my approach and the opponent starts to get some momentum, then, and maybe it doesn't sound logical, then I'd actually start to attack a bit more and have a look at what made the difference here to give me the lead. Because I've done something right to get the lead. And yeah, the dynamic of the match changes definitely due to the result. But in general, I've done a lot of good things to get that 2-0 lead. So I want to find out here, do I want to protect that, take some extra minutes, have a look at how the opponent presses me? Is it possible to keep the lead and slowing things down? Or is this just an opponent that can regain momentum? And if he then starts to regain the momentum, I need to find a way to then get the momentum back and see what happens. So in general, I don't think you should pay too much attention to the clock, actually, unless it's like the 80th, 85th minute where you can start to think about last attacks. Maybe 80 is too early, but certainly 85, you can have a look at, can I make sure that there's not more than at least 2 attacks in this game? Can I slow it down? But in general, just make sure that you keep the momentum for as long as possible. I guess that would be my best advice.
And, Josh and I both now played clubs with Richard Buckley, I think, right? So we're extra attuned to the Buckley philosophy of basically if it's after the 80th...
Of professional housery.
Yeah. If it's after the 80th minute and you're conceding, then you're doing something very wrong, basically. Because I think, Josh, you can keep the ball, really. If you're being really cynical about it, you should be able to keep the ball from the 80th minute until the end of the game.
Yeah, I don't feel totally comfortable talking here and telling people to, pass the ball around the back for 20 minutes. But it is true. And that thing of, it's tough because everybody wants to have a lovely community that doesn't quit at a draw and doesn't do all of these things. But the reality is that isn't the community we've got. And so you can either choose to be the doormat that everybody walks over and have it done to you, but I don't want to do that. Or just presume your opponent's going to do it the other way. So, you can...
If you're not going to do it, you have to be better.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
And also, everybody wants to say they're not going to do it. And I would say, I'm someone that for the vast majority of time, I'm going to just keep attacking. I always forget to put my fullbacks on stay back when I'm protecting a lead. And sometimes I kick myself for it. But also if I'm beating somebody that I know is better than me, then yeah, I'm going to play pretty cautious. I'm going to play very, very cautious and look for like very obvious scoring chances if they're going to come. Otherwise, I'm very content to make you chase me.
I actually want to add something there real quick.
Yeah.
There's also a mental perspective in this. Let's say you're in general struggling a lot during the games. And if you then decide to not protect the lead and play more cautious, and you end up throwing that lead, that starts to get you mentally exhausted, or at least I can say that personally, it has done that in the past for me, where I start to go into the next games and then thinking about, if I just kept that lead, I would still have had the momentum and now start to struggle. So you also want to have a look at, is these 5 minutes left really worth it for me just to keep going and have a nice game and be nice to my opponent? Well, I earned that lead, and if I know that it's going to affect me for the next game, that 5 minutes of keeping the ball, and to all the nice people and all the nice community, I respect you for doing that. I'm just saying that personally, if I have 5 minutes left on the clock and I have the lead, I'm going to do what I can to protect it, because I know it's going to affect me for the next game if I don't protect that lead and I throw it away.
It is funny because I'm definitely one of those players who's just like, I play this game for fun. I'm not going to play keep ball. But realistically, and this is the dumb thing, I'll be there, in some champs game that is fairly early on in my run, just messing about in the final 10 minutes, and then, well, not messing about, but you know what I mean? Like, playing to attack the whole time and being risky in my passing, and my opponent will score, and I don't know, I'll tie the game and then lose on penalties or something. But then as soon as I'm in a game where it's like, right, you're playing for 16 wins or whatever, then I'm going to pass it around and make sure my opponent doesn't get it, which just doesn't really make sense, right? If you're going to do something like that, you should really just do it in all your games, just for consistency and for the fact that you will get more wins across the champs weekend and you'll have less stressful games later.
You're also not flexing that muscle.
Yes, yeah, that's very true.
Because I don't often practice the art of _𝘬𝘬𝘦. When I'm in a situation where I need to do it, I occasionally make some pretty bad choices. I will make some bad choices, and I will give up a goal, and it's super deflating when that happens. And so, like, I once had someone tell me perfect practice makes perfect. And it's like, if you are not appropriately practicing in like situations where when it really, really matters and it's on the line, you're probably going to make some mistakes.
Totally agree. And maybe, it sounds mean, but you got to do it even if you're a few goals up, just to practice. If your opponent's pressing you, it's good practice, isn't it, to pass it around and try and keep the ball. So yeah. And we talked a lot about the sort of mental side, but it might be good on this particular point, Jeppe, to get some thoughts on the sort of mechanics of keeping the ball. What kind of specific tools would you recommend? Let's look at 11 to 14 win players, let's say, those trying to push to the 14 wins. Can you think of anything that they might find useful to add to their game, or something that they need to know when trying to keep the ball late on?
So, well, it's probably not a secret that the huck sideline is pretty effective and switching the play. I probably shouldn't have mentioned that. I really hope people doesn't do it against me, because it's really overpowered. But in general, that's one thing that makes it easier to keep the ball. Well, I also believe that it does affect your ability to hold the ball in terms of what speed are you playing at. Do you play too slow? Because if you play too slow and you're playing against an aggressive opponent, then you have less time to think. So in that case, you would need to be a bit more calm, and it would require you to have some kind of sense of what's going on the whole pitch, scanning the pitch, using the minimap. If you are not really great at scanning the pitch, you don't really use the minimap, I'm going to be honest, I really don't think you should try to keep the ball a lot until you've mastered these arts, because it's just going to put you into trouble, give the momentum to the opponent, applying too much pressure that you can't really deal with. So the first thing would be learning how to use the minimap, having a look at how your players run, how's your fullback positioned, finding out how your formation works. We've talked a lot about the 4-3-2-1, making sure you know exactly how do the fullbacks attack in that, how narrow do they stay, how much do they use the width, when can you switch the ball? Do you use L1 square to switch the ball? Do you use a regular square? Because those are two different things. You can also use R1, L1 square, but this would just require that the opponent doesn't get in and block the lane, because then you're in trouble and you're going to lose the ball. So yeah, I guess that kind of answers it.
One thing I have done a few times when getting pressed in a way that I'm not happy with and end up realizing I don't really have many options is if you use R1 and the square, or I guess it is X on the Xbox button, that's the precision lobbed pass. And if you full power that up the pitch, it really does fly and like get you out of trouble. I mean, you're not necessarily going to find a player, but in terms of something that is a bit of an emergency button that you can press, I found that quite useful. And as you're getting used to keeping the ball when you're being pressed, I think it can help people just to have a bit of a safety net. So, worth maybe trying that. Let's take a break here, actually. And I want to come back and ask, unsurprisingly, Jeppe, what you do if you were 2-0 down in a game late on. Let's take a break and we'll be back in just a second. Hello, listeners. A quick reminder that this podcast is made possible through the generosity of supporters out there. And actually, they aren't just doing it out of the kindness of their heart, because you get a whole extra podcast every single week as a supporter. And you can sign up for a 7-day free trial right now over on Patreon. And after that, it's just £3 a month to continue supporting. It makes a huge difference. The podcast for a time wasn't able to be weekly because I had other work commitments, but this has made it possible to deliver a podcast every single week. And in fact, an extra one too, just for supporters, as I mentioned. So if that interests you and you want that extra content, and actually if you would like even more, there's the supporter Discord at the gold tier. There is the Hall of Fame at the end of the podcast in the icon tier. There are loads of perks available. So why not check it out if you haven't done so already by searching Support FUT Weekly or following the link in the description of this podcast. If you consider doing so, that would be hugely appreciated. And a big thank you to all those supporters, as I said, keeping the podcast going and keeping FUT Weekly weekly. Right, let's get back into the pod. Hello and welcome back after the break. Right, so as I said, 2-0 down in the game. Let's say it's a bit earlier this time, about 60 minutes or something like that. As the game goes on, what's your approach going to be to that game, and what do you think would help people?
Quit the game. Nah, just kidding. Just take an early pause, request a pause. Well, we do have a lot of pauses available. If you have set up your tactics before the game, you don't really need all pauses in general. So just take that early pause. It's not going to mess with the game. You still have your substitutions available anyway. So take a pause, just have a look at the formation of the opponent, let the clock run down. One thing I believe is a big mistake for a majority of players is they just make their changes and then they go straight into the game. We have is it 30 seconds or something, or 40, I'm not really sure, but you have a lot of seconds available. And if you're just going straight back into the game, then you kind of wasted an opportunity to just relax, take a deep breath, just making sure that you're ready to go into the game. I know for sure if I get down by a couple of goals, my original game plan hasn't worked. And then instead of getting frustrated, I use that pause just to run it down, have a sip of water, just basically waiting, looking at that clock running down. I might even not be doing anything, but I'll just have a look at that countdown and saying in 5 seconds I need to be ready and regain focus. So that would be the first step mentally. And from there, try to do small changes that would hopefully get me back into the game and create some momentum. Going down early doesn't really mean necessarily that my plan is completely a disaster, but it just needs some small changes. Maybe it's not something with the formation, but there's something in the game that has brought me down, whether it's lack of focus from the beginning, maybe it's a kickoff I didn't defend well, maybe it's the same mistake I've made twice. Just have a look at the goals or have a think about, did I do something wrong here? From the goals, did I do something wrong in general that put me in this position? And from there, I'll just pick the one thing that can make the biggest difference now, instead of just thinking everything's a mess. I need to change every single thing I possibly can. I just have a look, what can I change right now that wouldn't require a lot of mental effort? Do that thing, see how that works out. If it's working out and I still have a lot of mental energy, I'll have a look at the next thing. If it's not working out, I'll go through my imaginary list and just go to the next point. See, can I do anything here when the first thing didn't work?
Yeah, I forgot about the imaginary list. You mentioned this last time. Do you want to just run us through the steps people should be taking then when they take that pause?
So this is pre-game. This is before these games. In general,
before, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, you can maybe do it, but it's not going to be as efficient. So I'll have a look at my own games. And if you don't have the time to go through your games, just have a quick think of what mistakes do you typically make and how much does it impact you. So instead of just having a really specific, complex list of player logs and all that stuff, that's nice and that's useful, but I just have a list where I ask myself a yes or no question that doesn't require much mental effort. So the first one would be, do I play too narrow? Yes or no? If I play too narrow, I need to change that and play with more width. If I'm playing with too much width and I'm not really attacking much in the central part of the field, I need to change that. I'm having a question where, do I play too slow? Do I play too quick? Do I have the perfect balance? Do I rush my attacks? Do I keep enough positions? Do I make enough runs? Just stuff like that really helps me, because it has to be a yes or no question that I can answer immediately. If I'm having to think about this and it will take like 10 or 15 seconds, then it's not really going to help me. I need to have these quick questions that I can go through to make my decision making so much easier. Because if I'm not attacking with enough speed, then maybe it can be helpful to play a bit more direct, but it can also help me to make these runs. So this way I can make sure that if I answer yes to one question, I immediately get the idea that I can move on to the next thing on my list, and I can add these two things as one change that doesn't require extra thinking from me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And actually, Josh, let's come to you, because I don't know how many times Jeppes is actually down 2-0 over the course of champs. So
maybe more than you think.
But is it from lack of focus and then you're like, I should focus?
Well, there's a lot of lack of focus, but like what happens to me, there's some matches where like I might be down 2-0 because like they scored off the first kickoff and then I made another mistake and I'm like, no 2-0 matches are the same. Like, do you know what I mean? Or no matches where you're down 2-0 are like exactly the same. Like oftentimes I can pinpoint maybe what's not working. There are games where I'm like, I'm down. Do you know what I mean? Like this is a different kind of down. Like I'm losing. I'm getting battered.
Yeah.
And those games, I'm quicker to make wholesale. Well, I don't really change my formation actually, but I will. The example that I want to give is there are some matches where Drogba's like a ghost or my striker's like a ghost and it's just not working. And I just bring on Socrates super early because I need that player not to score goals anymore. I need them to create and make passes because that's what my opponent's giving me. And I think that's the change that like, I don't think people have like a set idea of when they make subs in like the 65th or 70th minute or something like that. But like, why? Like you can make them whenever. And I'm like very happy to just take Drogba out of matches. If he's not working, bring someone else on. Or like, it rarely happens to best, but when I use a different player as my second striker, sometimes they're just like not popping up in the right spots based on how my opponent is playing, and I'll just take them out. Like I have no issue making an early substitution to give a different player that I'm still quite fond of the opportunity to find space appropriately.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Let's come to you then, Josh. Any particular changes you're making typically, in the second half that you feel makes a big difference aside from subs? Obviously, we talked about that earlier.
Usually, like, in terms of a change, it will more be that I've been observing my opponent, and very often people's way of attacking is the thing they're most vulnerable to defensively, because they've been beaten by it so many times. They're like, I have to learn how to do that so that I can do it to other people. I'm absolutely somebody who's guilty of this as well. And so as much as like I will very often make substitute changes and will often have a look at my opponent's formation if I'm struggling, I think one of the biggest things is to try and learn how your opponent's playing. What is their tendency when they're on the wing, where do they usually cut? What is their kind of safety movement? Can you start being a little bit more aggressive and guessing a touch before they make it so that you can get a cleaner tackle in? I think there's a few things like that I start kind of implementing. I do think there is a point in a match where the biggest thing that you can do, the most useful thing that you can do, is leave. I definitely think that there are those kinds of points. If you spend half an hour of a match where you're 3-0 down and you're just annoyed and angry and it's getting more and more frustrating because your opponent's just a little bit better than you, so you always feel like you should have been able to make that pass, I should have been able to make that tackle, but you're actually a split second out and it's just not quite going that way. You can take that frustration very easily into the next game. And when you feel that happening to you, use up all your pauses and see if you can calm yourself down. But if you're not calm, if it's like annoying you to the point where, you know, you can feel yourself getting hot, just leave. Like, just leave and take 10 minutes out, because I honestly think people see a loss as this huge, awful thing that happens, but the vast majority of people are going to lose half of their games. You know, on average, people are going to lose half the games that they play, whether they're giving them away or actually losing the match. So sometimes it's okay to just take it and move on. It's not going to be the end of the world. You know, people will get unbelievable packs and picks from getting 9 and 11 wins.
Yeah,
and people are going to get terrible things from getting 19, 20 wins. It's not the end of the world. So I think it's more about a reset of your own mentality when you're down in a game of like, can you do something different? Can you combat what your opponent's doing? But also, it doesn't matter. Just relax.
Yeah, I'd also make that point about the sort of whole champs run, if you like, that just because you're losing games early, you know, doesn't mean you need to be concerned about how things are going to end up in the end, because the way form works, for those who don't know, if you lose a game, you go to -1. If you lose another one, you'll go to -2. And, you know, you will face easier opponents theoretically as time goes on. But the fact that you'll not reach such a high or low over the rest of the games that you're playing will also help you as you come towards those games towards the end. So just bear that in mind as well, that, you know, if you're losing early, don't get too disheartened, and it'll probably work out in the end. I think the take each game as it comes thing is really never more true than in champs, to be honest, because people get so swept up in, oh, if I just get, you know, 1 win in my last 2, then, you know, I'll get that particular reward. Or they're playing a game and, you know, in their mind, they've already got that next reward that they're going for, but, you know, you actually haven't, and that kind of thing. So, you know, focus on the game, take each game as it comes is a huge help. And on that, you know, probably more broad point, it's time to wrap up, I think. There'll be plenty more gameplay podcasts throughout Team of the Season. Next week would be a supporter episode. You can check that out on the Patreon. Just search Support for Weekly. And we'll say our goodbyes. So yeah, Jeppes, it's been fantastic to have you on this gameplay podcast as always.
Thank you much, Ben. Good luck to everyone as they, you know, hopefully hit their weekend league goals. Or just hopefully their picks are good, because I can't tell you how many times that I've sweat super hard to get top picks and then gotten hot garbage, only to see one of my followers on Twitter get like 10 wins and get the highest rated Team of the Season card. So
yeah, it's at AirJapes, by the way, if it isn't a steaming pile of mediocrity.
Yeah, exactly. That's what my picks always look like. Yeah. Hopefully not. All right, it's been real.
Well, good luck as well, and thank you very
Cheers.
much. Thank you. And thank you very much as well to Josh. It's been good as always to have you on this FUT Weekly podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's I'm excited for champs. Again, once you remove any pressure you put on yourself, it becomes a lot easier to just kind of have a laugh. So yeah, let go.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And finally to Jeppe, it's been fantastic to have your insight on this podcast. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure. And I just want to say one last thing. Just take Josh's advice here in the end of the podcast. That was a great advice. If you're really struggling, you're going down with so many goals that it's almost impossible to get back into the game, and you start to get frustrated. Remember, it's just a game. In rivals, okay, if you want to practice to just your mental strength, just stay in the game. But in champs, it's just about keeping as much sanity as humanly possible and have a nice experience.
Yes, it's a really good point. And Team of the Season is long. There are plenty of opportunities, to play for rewards over the course of it. And yeah, looking forward to it. So thank you very much to all you listeners for tuning in via the various different podcast platforms and elsewhere. You can subscribe via those podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcast from as well. And of course, you can catch the podcast on YouTube. So if you are listening over there, leave a like, drop a comment. It really does help out. And I do read all of them. And do subscribe if you fancy it. And if you'd like an extra podcast every single week, then you can become a supporter. There's a free trial, so you can check it out. And if you'd like to continue as a supporter, it's just £3 a month. And yes, an extra podcast every week. A big thank you to all those supporters and those icon patrons. Dave B, Hugh J, Darren W, Alistair M, Dom P, Rob P, Jeff B, Damon H, Tom B, Adam G, Neil P, Alex M, Jake S, Dan W, Roger D, Lee A, Andrew C, Nishant, Waterman, Dylan H, Adam R, Rob L, Brendan W, Michael K, David G, Jimmy K, Cherry Drank, John D, Michael B, Aditya S, and Joshua K. Plus a special thanks to Luke M, Dave B, Hugh J, Tom M, Darren W, and Pato Foot for advice and production assistance. Before I leave you, just one more thing to add though. Ultimate Team is a bit like life really. It has its many ups and downs. If you're having a few more downs than ups in real life in these more difficult times, then please don't feel that you're alone or need to struggle on without taking action. If you go to thecalmzone.net, there's loads of resources, advice, support, or even just a friendly chat for anyone who needs it. If it sounds like it could help you, then head over to thecalmzone.net. And for now, have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.